Steve Baker.
Steve, welcome for the fourth and last in our series, The History of Affinity Water in 12 Objects. Now, tell our audience where we are today. We seem to be in the middle of the countryside somewhere.
We are, but we're not far from the centre of Watford, in fact. This is Brightwell Farm, which is the other end of Vicarage Road, which is the famous football ground. But you wouldn't think we were anywhere near there.
No, you've got a hand on a gate now, so this is a tricky manoeuvre for both of us.
Okay.
And
we've managed that now.
yeah, so why are we in this particular spot today?
We're coming to see the site of a railway, a narrow gauge railway, which was owned and operated by Colne Valley Water Company, built in 1931 and closed in the late 60s.
So let me get this right. A water company owned a railway.
That's right. The coal needed to be transported from the mainline railway to the pumping station at Eastbury Pumping Station.
Now, we can, just over these fields, if we stop walking for a bit, actually see the pumping station.
Yep, that's the roof of it. Over there to our left, a low-lying roof. And there's a fence and a sort of bits of hedgerow, which is similar to what was around in 1960, except all overgrown. And in the picture taken in August 1960, you can actually see the railway and the track. Today, we're just going to see if we can see the track bed, but you can see the stile that used to go over the railway.
We know that we're in the right spot where the track was, because indeed in front of us is a bridge, a steel bridge.
That's right, it's quite a distance away. Can just see it in the photograph, but it's painted green, fairly faded green, but this took the track over the River Colne. And there was also a footbridge, which was a set of steep steps up and then steep steps down the other way. That was actually transported from here after the 1925 Wembley exhibition, and it was going to be for part of what was called then a non-stop railway, which was another circuit on exhibition there, but it proved to be handy just to allow pedestrians to cross the track.
And do we know how long the track was and where it went if we turn round?
Yeah, it was 2 miles, and it ran from the pumping station behind us in a great big arc to join the mainline railway.
And you said it operated, but railways, if we get to the turn of the 20th century and the contribution that the Stevenson family made, the term narrow gauge is very important, isn't it? Because it meant there was a standardisation of railway tracks across the country.
That's right. This particular one was 2 feet wide, so the track was just 2 foot across, and these engines, of which there were 2, were diesel powered.
The engines are where today?
They're in the Amberley Museum. That's where they were taken to when they were decommissioned in the late 1960s. They're in the Amberley Museum, which is in Sussex.
That's remarkable. So 2 of what were Affinity Water's engines, rail engines, are in a museum today.
That's right, and they were built by Ruston and Hornsby. And they were 16 horsepower diesel locomotives. And they carried also salt and chlorine, which was for the water softening at the time. I mean, dread to think about it now. Actually switched to diesel. The pumping station switched to diesel actually in 1956. So this line was actually closed 11 years later in 1967.
So if we just get our bearings again, the engines are in the Amberley Museum, and I believe you've also found a photograph of them.
Yes, one of the engines. I did actually manage to find a photo, looking in a very sorry state, but that's what you'd expect after several years of transporting coal, salt and chlorine, just the type of things that are going to make an engine look rather worse for wear.
And in terms of our series, The History of Affinity Water in 12 Objects, this really brings home how important engineering was. We've touched on that before with our other objects.
Yes, it really does. I think this one probably more than anyone. And it's rather unusual to be operating a railway when you're a water company. I'm sure it's not unique, but the first one I've read about within our organisation and its predecessors.
Well, perhaps we can now do a spoiler and you can tell us what our other 2 objects are, because we're doing 3 objects per 4 series. I note you're standing here in a normal jacket and black shoes, and you look very comfortable, but that wasn't always the way, was it?
No, footwear was important, still is, but footwear is much, much more comfortable now than it was. Even as late as 79 when I started, footwear was quite what you might deem hobnail boots, if you like. we were issued with tin marked Dubbin. That, until quite recently, I thought was the name of the actual product, but Dubbin is, it looks like Vaseline in a way, and it was to coat and nurture the leather of your boots, not to make them particularly shiny, that's a boot polish job, but you would put this on, well, I used to do it a bit too much because it smelt nice, once a week.
And it's made from beeswax.
It's made from beeswax and talon, I think it's called, the talon. So, yeah, we were issued with this and did it sort of kind of weekly to keep the elements at bay.
We've got railway track, we've got Dubbin, and our other object this week is donkey jackets.
Donkey jackets, yes, they were issued, and they're kind of a fashion thing now, but at the time they were standard workwear. So it's woolen jacket, and it had orange high-vis on the shoulders and sort of on the cuffs of the arms, if I remember. Again, very akin to a railway attire in some ways. And donkey jackets were...
It dates back to the Manchester Ship Canal.
The Manchester Ship Canal, that's right. I was just going to say they were for the labourers to wear. They were to protect them from the weather and the elements, really. And it comes from the fact that they did donkey work.
And they actually loaded stuff onto a donkey engine. So the tailor who'd made the jackets for them, he had a shop, but they then got called the nickname donkey jackets.
That's right. That's how they've been known ever since.
Now, again, let's go back to your attire today. You can remember wearing donkey jackets and those boots that needed dubbing?
Yep, absolutely. Issued the first day with those. Wore them every time out on site.
Well, just describe to us what those boots look like, because they were heavy on your feet, weren't they?
They were. I think they were basically DMs. They might not have been that by a trade name.
Yeah,
but
they look just like Doc
of
Martens.
That ilk, with many laces to tie up and quite stiff until you'd worn them in. Mine were brown, I think. I really wanted black, but had to have what I was given.
And in terms of the donkey jacket, you had these big donkey jackets, and because they were so thick, they must have acted as protective clothing, because they also had a fluorescent marks on them. But you didn't have helmets.
I wasn't issued with a helmet at the time. Guess at some point they were used on site. Perhaps I didn't go near any kind of movable or dangerous parts. I just went to sites that weren't being developed or surveying. I certainly did not have a safety helmet in the early years.
What an aeroplane just flew overhead. I should tell
yes.
our listeners, we're
can't see
standing
it.
in the middle of this windy field.
Yeah.
But so the equipment, the safety equipment used by water company workers has changed remarkably. But you might actually say that donkey jacket was the equivalent of PPE today.
Yeah, 100%. I was wearing the donkey jacket, so were some of the gangs, the operatives. But at that time, many of the operatives, they were in ordinary clothes, not a sign of any PPE at all. And it's just kind of developed now to almost anybody wears high-vis now.
Well, if we recap on our objects, a narrow gauge railway and two of our own railway engines in Amersham Museum, and then we had dubbing used for the boots, the Doc Marten boots, and also the donkey jacket. But if we just walk back towards the pumping station, we can actually see relics of where the rail line ran, can't we? Because there's a rusty old post that clearly had a sign on it that would have pointed the way around that arc.
Yeah, we're now standing on what I believe to be the track bed. The sign is, although it's rusty, it has got some green on it, which is the same colour as the bridge, so it leads me to think it's probably railway orientated signage, maybe keep off the tracks or warning, trains coming or something like that. So I believe we're now in the exact same spot as the August 1960 photograph was taken. Very, very different to look at though.
I have to congratulate you, Steve Baker. This has been a wonderful series to work on, to report and to produce. But we're now heading back to Hatfield office. Any lessons that we can learn from Affinity Water and the Clone Valley company's past, do you think, if we're looking to our future? We always say we're looking back to the future.
I think, yes, do look to the future, obviously. Do be aware of the past as well, and keep your eye out for the smallest things, because it's not hard if you scratch beneath the surface to find something really interesting.
And you are indeed using today what was our first object, a map.
Yes, it was. That's right. Yes, I am holding a map, so we still need those.
But they're very different. You printed
Yeah,
that
I
out. The
printed
maps
this one out.
that you started with were hand-drawn.
They were, yeah. I mean, I've got one from the 1930s here, and it actually calls the track, which this enabled me to locate it in comparison to what we're using now, Google Earth.
And did that come from the Affinity Water Records?
It did.
Wow.
It did, yes.
That's quite something.
It's a section of it, and here's the pumping station on the bottom right-hand corner. Here's where we're standing right now, near the farm, and they don't call it a railway, they call it a tramway. I wonder what denotes the difference.
So, Steve, just to recap, our 12 objects were?
Maps, logos and tankers.
That was the first series. Then second was sculpture, pumping station and reservoirs.
And we had trunk mains, covers and bridges.
And today we've covered the railway, dubbing and donkey jacket. What a collection of objects to tell Affinity Water's history. Congratulations, it's been a great series.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it and I hope everybody has too.
Well, we mustn't lose you because you are our history man. Steve Baker, thank you very much indeed for taking us through the history of Affinity Water and previous companies that were owned in our series, The History of Affinity Water in 12 Objects. I've enjoyed it so much.
Yeah, likewise, Bonnie. Thank you very much, and we'll do it again sometime.
Thank you. And signing off from where?
Signing off from Eastby Pumping Station.
Thank you, Steve.